Hello, and welcome to the Catch a Break podcast, the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating the entertainment industry. Season 2 of Catch a Break is brought to you by Cachet, the production credit card. Manage your cards and spend in real time and get cash back on every dollar you spend on your show with Cachet. I'm Julie Harris-Walker, and today on the podcast we'll be going over budgeting with Jeanette Volturno, Rick Osako, Jessica Malanaphy, and Shirley Davis, the whole team behind Catch a Break. Welcome to Catch a Break and our budgeting episode. And for this episode, we have our core gang here. We have Rick Osako and Shirley Davis and Jessica Malanaphy and Jeanette Volturno. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
It's been a while since we got the gang all together. So it's always a miracle when we get you all in the same room, and we're missing Marcy Brown today. But we got a quorum, so we're going to do budgeting. So we want to go through as much as we can get to in an hour, everything you need to know about budgeting. So let's start at the beginning, old school. Jeanette.
Right. So back in the day when Rick and I were at Catchlight, we had an office in Marina Del Rey, and we wanted to really understand and hone our budgeting skills. And we took the lessons that we had learned from the people that we had worked with beforehand, which was, and I know this is not eco-friendly, but print out your budget and get as many different colored highlighters as you possibly can and create a key on the front page of the sheet. And you highlight everything in a different color. So a prop will be one color, an animal will be another color, a car will be another color, a actor will be a color, like locations. You just pick every intricate piece of the script and give it a color. And we were joking. Those colors back then were limited to about 6.
Yeah.
And so we would have to get creative with them. Yeah. Squiggles,
dots,
lines, anything that you could do to differentiate what the different parts are. Nowadays, I'm sure you can get your hands on 20 different colors of highlighters.
So this is the beginning of your breakdown. So
yes.
You know how many props, how many sets, how many people. So these are all the elements that you're going to pull together to put them in your budget.
Yes.
What would your next step be, Rick?
The next step would be trying to create a first pass at a shooting schedule. So you can incorporate how many days something is working or how many days an actor is working, how many days you're going to be at a location, what to put in your budget for a company move, how to plan switching from one location to another location, and what you're going to require of your actor and their availability so you can budget appropriately.
So scheduling is probably a whole nother episode that we could do a deep dive on. But in general, you're breaking down script pages to how many days to get all those things. So assuming we now have a schedule, now what do you do?
Well, I would say what's interesting about the schedule that people don't understand about a budget is that the schedule is the shooting schedule, but it's not necessarily the budgeting schedule. So you have to add a little bit to that because when you move into a location, you don't just show up at the location. The art department probably has to be there a couple of days beforehand to prep the location. Well, you got to put that in the budget, but that's not in the schedule.
Right.
So you have to start thinking like each department, like what do I need to do to pull this off in each department? What does art department need to do in this location? What does transpo need to do to this location? And what do they need to do to get out of the location? What do they need to do to restore it back to the way that it was? So when you're putting it together, you're taking that schedule and you're adding different pieces for each of the departments for what it is that they're bringing to that location.
And then are you sending that out to get estimates from all those different departments as to how long they think things are going to take and how much they're going to cost?
Well, in the beginning, you are trying to figure it out yourself until you get friends. And then hopefully you get friends in each of the departments and you can say like, hey, please read this and tell me what you think and help me break this down. How would you do it?
Now, are you starting a budget from scratch?
Yes. Every budget is unique to the script and your requirements for that specific project. So yes, you start from scratch and you start with your very basics and you build into your budget the unique requirements that are written in the script and start build. Those are your building blocks for creating a budget.
And I would say that like the main software that people use is Movie Magic Budgeting. That's what most people use. It does come with certain templates. There are chart of accounts that come with particular pieces to that budget. If you're doing an indie budget, it doesn't really matter what chart of accounts you use. If you're doing a budget for a particular company or a studio, it definitely matters what chart of accounts you use. And they break them down and do them differently. And those chart of accounts are something that slots into the hot costs, the cost reports, and their overall company stuff. So you have to pay attention to that as you move up the scale of doing budgets.
Can you give us a quick definition of what a chart of accounts is?
It's the numbers on the side of each account for the subcategories. So each department will be labeled, like on our example, we have production is 811. So under the production staff, it'll be like the coordinator is 811 dash and then a number. And then the production secretary will be 811 dash and then a number. So you can track each thing. And when you do a location and you have set dressing and you have particularities that go to a bedroom or something or an actor or something, you can track those minute costs to that particular thing. So say you wanted to know that you needed to go back to a location and reshoot the bedroom. You can go back to your budget and you can look under certain subcategories for whatever set dressing you had in that bedroom and whatever location you had for that, and even construction.
And it also helps you when you're breaking down the script and you're doing your budget and you're $2 million over your targeted bottom line that you were trying to hit. You can go to your director and your creatives and say, okay, this particular construction set that we're building on stage is about $750,000 over. We need to drop $2 million from the script. So let's start. $2 million from the budget. So let's look at these particular areas that are troublesome. And it's good to have that beforehand so you can have a productive conversation with the creatives and the writer and the director and say, okay, we need to concentrate on these areas so we can drop the bottom line of the budget.
Because if Rick comes to me and says, this is what's killing your budget, it's this element right here, and I can say, oh, that's not really that important to my story, I can replace it with something else, and we can all get creative and working with the writer and the director, we can come up with something that gives you the same story beat, but doesn't cost the same ding to your budget, then that becomes the collaboration between creative and production.
And I would say usually you get a better story out of that, right? The more you work at something, the more you realize what is really important to the bottom line.
What's the essence of it that you really need to capture?
Yeah.
And the story is the thing that governs everything. The schedule, the budget, all the cost reports, the call sheets, the production reports, that has its own narrative. So the important thing to bear in mind is if you're trying to hit a number, you shouldn't do it alone. You should do it in conjunction with your creative exec.
Because there are going to be other things that seem perhaps trivial, but then you know that it's really important either to the director's vision that we really shoot something a specific way. And a lot of times we'll get into that conversation of, okay, this is one thing that I really have to preserve, even though it is a big thing in the budget. How do we find lots of other little things? Or is there another big ticket item that we can sacrifice in order to get that one really important thing for the vision?
Now we hear a lot of talk about tiers, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. What does that mean?
It means you cry a lot.
Well, that goes without saying. But what does it mean in terms of budget?
Well, there is a contract with the different unions. Each contract is different. SAG has their low budget agreement, IATSE has theirs, and DGA has theirs. So in terms of, let's take one, IATSE, if you are going to apply for their low budget agreement, you have to keep your total cost of under $6 million for tier 1. What that does is that gives you very specific rates for all of the IATSE crew, and it's a pre-negotiated rate. And that helps you plug in all the rates for your crew. A lot of the times when you do those low budget tier 1 projects, the rates are not open for negotiation because everyone knows that they're coming in for low budget. So that price is what is determined by IATSE and is compliant with their contract. So usually you can get the crew for that specific rate because they know in advance that this is compliant with IATSE rules and these are the rates.
And it was also the union's solution to having projects of different sizes be covered under union rules, because at the time there had been independent rates and majors rates. So they governed some studios and then all the major studios. And in order to have working professionals in the business comply with their rules and restrictions, they started to place different tiers.
If you change the tier while you're in production, like say you go back and you do reshoots and you go over the tier cutoff, do you have to go back and re-rate everybody from the beginning of production, or is it from that point on?
Oh, it's from the beginning.
It's a nightmare.
It is. You have to be very careful when putting something together that you allow yourself enough wiggle room should you need additional costs in post-production or any reshoots so that you don't cross that tier. We've done it a few times, and let me tell you, heads up, you have to give the union a notification that you're going to cross the tier. Otherwise, they can be very, very grouchy about it, and you might not get what you thought you were going to get. So you have to give them the heads up. And then, you have to go back and re-rate everybody from the very beginning, which is a nightmare.
You got to go and recalculate all the payroll and do it over.
And you will be audited.
It's not fun for anybody at any level. So then once you determine what tier you're going to be in, where do you find those rates?
They have some online manuals now. Each of the payroll services usually have the latest rates that are accessible online, or you can order books. They're called Paymasters, and you can find those through the different payroll companies and use those if you want a hard copy next to you. What's interesting is it depends on what part of the country you're in will depend on what rates you're landing. So if you're in the low budgets are a national contract. It's the same no matter where you are. Once you get up into the major rates or the black book rates, there's different rates depending on if you are in a production city, if you are in New York, if you are in the ASA and you're not in the production cities, not in New York. Like, there are different levels for that. So having a good accountant to be able to reach out to, having a payroll service that you can lean on to get some of these answers, because there are quite a lot of cross rates in some of these things. And you have to understand what corridor you're falling into for the different levels for the different unions.
And that also applies to the fringes that you need to apply to every individual who's working on your production.
Yes.
And fringes cover pension, health, and welfare. It covers federal, state, and local taxes. It covers, idle days, which are days that you pay crew when you take them on location. It addresses trainee programs that are part of the contracts. It covers all that, and that is applicable to where you are in the country as well.
And even if you're non-union and just doing small things, you still need to pay the local, state, and federal taxes, so you'll have to be dealing with fringes on that.
And there's spots in Movie Magic for you to put those fringes in.
Yes.
So
in fact,
it.
There are free classes that you can take that'll give you beginning introductory training in Movie Magic, and those are really great to take because the more you practice, the easier it gets. What we used to do back in the day is we would tell people, let us do your breakdown and your budget. And when your film gets greenlit, because a lot of times it's you never know if a film is going to go or not, especially if it's an indie. We would say, don't pay us now. Let us show you what we can do. We'll put a budget and a breakdown together for you. And when it goes, we'll do the project. Hire us for the project. And because of that, I think Rick and I did hundreds of budgets back in the day. And that's one of the reasons why I think we really hit it off with Jason, because we were sitting on Paranormal Activity, and he asked us to do a budget for a script that he had on Guantanamo Bay. And he said, how much is it going to cost me to hire you to do this budget? And I said, don't pay me. Just let me do it. We'll give it back to you. When it goes, you hire us to line produce it. He was like, oh my God, I've never had anybody do that for me. Ever had anybody do that.
That worked out.
It did. And what it gives you, besides the fact of ingratiating yourself with somebody, as long as you don't let them abuse it, is practice.
Yeah.
You need a lot of practice.
I bet you guys got really good at doing budgets.
We did. We got so good at budgets that I don't highlight anymore. I do it in my head.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So if you're looking at budgets and rates and you are comparing different jurisdictions, what all do you need to think about if you're comparing, say, Atlanta to Louisiana?
What other productions are going to be in the city at the same time as you? Availability of facilities and infrastructure for where you're going, weather, crew base, your talent. If it's an easy in and out for your major talent, sometimes they will go to certain areas and not others.
Incentives are a big thing to speak to the film commissions and find out, how much money do they have allocated? B, are there any other films that will be there at the same time? Because that will also impact your crew question. And C, if there is a sunset clause, if that incentive will end up ending sooner than you think. And then I guess D, what is the payout? How many years? Is it over 1 year, over 2, over 3? Because that would affect your cash flow.
And cash or credit.
Yes.
Yes, is it transferable? And then also what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. It may not be apples to apples in places that you go. You may have to go back and
I say
the different parts.
the hidden things that people don't think about is, you mentioned insurance and weather, but in certain areas of the country, it's hurricanes and floods and various things. And if you're there at that particular time of year, your insurance may double or triple just to get that clause to have that insurance on that. And that's not something that people really think about if they're not from that part of the country, but they're going there to film.
Florida and some other jurisdictions have incentive uplifts that they'll give you if you shoot in areas that are underprivileged. Or if it's, with Georgia, if you put the peach on the end credits and the higher it goes, they'll give you an extra 5%. So there are definitely ways that they try to sweeten the deal for everybody as well.
So I think the answer is with incentives is you really have to do your homework and look at it line by line. It's not enough to just plug in some other percentage.
Yeah, well, make friends with the film office there because they want people to come and they're there as the outreach and they'll be able to give you an idea of what other projects are filming there and what they have left in their piggy bank to be able to give you because some of them cap out very quickly.
Okay, what about you think you're saving money because you got the local high school cheer squad to come work for free in your movie? What else do you need to think about?
Feeding them.
Clothing them, sheltering them, transferring them from one location to another, where they're all going to park their cars.
Liability, getting photo likeness releases.
Making sure that you're in compliance with SAG and that you've hired enough SAG people ahead of time before you can trigger non-union people, or you're turning them all SAG.
That free thing could turn out to be really expensive.
That often happens on sports movies where you have to fill a stadium and you have to keep 1,000, 1,500 extras entertained from the morning till late afternoon, evening, and they may just want to stay until lunchtime. So lots of times it turns into another event in and of itself, like almost a fundraising event where you have to give them prizes and different things, but it's still cheaper in many cases to bring them on rather than having to pay for SAG extras. It's in addition to.
You need a lot of people to wrangle them.
Yeah.
A lot of PAs to wrangle.
Okay, what does it mean when you talk about assumptions about budget?
Well, you have to get all of the information from your higher-ups when you're putting the budget together. How much are you paying the producers? How much are you paying the writers, the director, the cast, all of the above the line? If it's a sequel to something, there are usually payments that you have to pay to the people who made it to begin with. So you need to know that. That's tripped me up before, where I didn't realize that we needed to pay the person who wrote something before, and 20 years later, you've got to go back and pay them again. I didn't realize that there were such clauses in certain contracts. So it's really researching what that above the line is and what are expected. And then when you start putting the cast together for it, you have to have an idea of what it is, the perk package that you're paying them. So, when you're negotiating and you're finding your dream person, are they coming with an entourage? Are they, I know this sounds silly, but sometimes it's like a handbag that will get them to do the show. I know that sounds silly. It has happened. It's a certain truck and trailer or driver that they'll only want, or they need to rent a particular house because their family is coming with them and it needs to have X amount of rooms because of this and that and whatever. So
and also their family is coming with them and their nanny.
The family and the nanny and the whole thing. So you need to kind of get all of those assumptions and work with your creative and your casting and your director and your legal and everybody to help you pull in all of those. It's really a combined effort. It's impossible to do a budget in the dark. You have to reach out to all of your department heads and all of your right and left arms.
Yeah, your budget's a living entity. It's going to keep changing until you lock it. So you will have assumptions when you build your budget. And they could be something like, assuming that this scene is shot practical and we are not going to do it in visual effects. Assuming 40 days and not 40 days plus 2 days of a second unit. Assuming that this major actor will fly in and stay during their days off and not have to be flown back 2 or 3 times. There are assumptions that you have to build into your budget that will impact. So your list of assumptions helps the creatives and the executives look at your budget with the same rationale that you created those numbers and put it in.
So when I am working with a casting director, for example, one of my first calls is to the line producer to say, what roles are budgeted for scale or schedule F, and what do you have budgeted for these other roles, so that I know what we can offer and the type of, the range of actor that's going to work for whatever that rate is. So we don't end up chasing, Robert Downey Jr. for something where he's never going to do it for scale, and you dictate how you put your cast together based on what the budget looks like. And then of course, if there's a compromise there of, we really want to stretch for this person, then where else are we going to take it out of?
Also, it's called critical assumptions for a reason, because everything that is on your top page of the budget is everything everybody's mentioned, but it has to be accurate. If you lose any piece of information that's part of that critical blueprint, then you'll find later, we have $1 million that we forgot to put in. That has an adverse effect on the budget, and it's really just a contract that someone didn't read appropriately, or as Jessica said, an actor whose quote is much higher and they come with a perk package that is actually quite a bit for the type of movie that you want.
They're raw vegan chef.
Exactly. Or in the days of Tom Cruise and John Travolta, and even now I think there are cast members with or The Rock. You definitely need a gym trailer.
A gym.
Like
a private jet.
Yeah, all of that. And also, are they portal to portal, meaning can they only work 12 hours and that's the entirety of their schedule, and yet you're making a movie or a TV series with children. So that might help because it's a shortened day, but it really depends. Like, that's how you start to piece the puzzle together to see what are the elements of this project that you're trying to put together. So that's your first inkling, and everybody can look at that and make decisions from there.
So beyond what's on the page, all the things.
Yeah, that's a big one. Like, there are lots of things that, as a young producer making offers to actors, you really want to say, what does it matter if we give portal to portal? Like that, the agent tells you that's a standard thing that they always get in your contract. And then you start talking to production about what that actually means, that they're only available to you for 10 hours a day because they live an hour away.
And they're in makeup for 4 hours before and an hour to remove it.
Yeah, and then suddenly you're down to 3 hours to shoot with your lead, and that's not going to work. So it's all those seemingly small details that really add up.
So the moral to that is you really have to communicate a lot with your entire team. And I tell you, the one area that fluctuates a lot that people don't really pay attention to when they're doing it internationally is exchange rates. Okay. Be conservative on the exchange rate, and if you have someone that can help you hedge something, lock it in.
We actually, on bigger budget productions, would pre-buy all of the money, even if you know that it's likely to go down, just so that you know what your budget's going to look like. You pre-buy your currency, so you're not going to have that fluctuation.
Yeah.
But no one anticipated Brexit. And we were shooting something that was, on the run up to Brexit, and we definitely got hit by the pound fluctuation. So
you got pounded by the pound.
Yes.
Well, I would love to go through, we provided a budget top sheet that you can download and follow along with, but let's just go through it really quick. And the stuff I really want to hear is what's included in that category and what's included in that category that you may not think to put in there, but is really going to bite you.
Well, the one thing that I would say is people say, 3% should be for this and 10% should be for this. And, this is how budgets should lay and this is how the percentage pie should lay out. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that the way that you conceive how you shoot something depends on the story and the people that you're doing it with. We started in our early career by making a definitive decision to and I'm sorry, Teamsters, but cut transpo as much as we possibly can and base things in real locations and put the money on the screen. And if the script called for that and it could work, then it works. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. And, but each budget is going to be a different beast. It's going to have a different thing. And you can't always say 3% goes here, 5% goes here, 10% goes there.
However, I would say that for above the line and behind the scenes, you do have a different percentage that you would use. If you had a
Nope, we still don't. Because some stuff, especially with the past shows that we've worked with, producers didn't take any above the line. So if producers took no above the line, that changes what your entire ATL is.
outside of the Blumhouse model, though, you could have a $20 million all-in movie, but if your above the line is like 6 or 7, that weights too heavily to make a movie where the production value is on the screen, because that only leaves you, maybe 12, less than that, 10 for the behind the scenes or the shooting period, and then you have post.
Right.
Going back to the previous comment, yes, I understand your point, but every budget is going to be different. So I understand Jeanette's point about not trying to say a percentage should be this or this, because it again depends on the story. If the story is more of a kitchen sink drama where all the action takes place in the house with no visual effects, your below the line might be a little bit smaller because you have no visual effects, you have no company moves, you have less of a makeup department because you have 3 actors, So I understand both sides. I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, which when you're first starting out, it's always good to see multiple producers' budgets so you can kind of see where their head is and kind of dissect it and help yourself learn, okay, I've got to remember this when I build my budget for my project.
That above the line, below the line, or behind the scenes ratio is really important too when you're getting into development and you're making deals with writers, because when you're getting into production, it all feels like real money that's actually going to be spent. Whereas sometimes when you're in development, you start making these deals that are a little bit more theoretical, because who knows if this movie is ever going to get made. And it's something that I've really found that you have to, from the very conception of a project, when you're talking to people about coming in and even writing something for you for free on spec, you have to make sure that they're aware that you're going to try to do this as a low budget project, and this isn't going to be a big payday. So even if we are able to sell it and we are able to make it, maybe they're going to get scale at that point. But making sure that everybody above the line kind of knows what they're signing up for from the beginning, or you're going to end up with this great project and then you go and try to do the deals. And like Shirley's saying, your above the line is so out of whack, you're never going to be able to make your financials work.
Just from looking at it from a payroll perspective, we look at it from what percentage of this budget is behind the scenes, and then what percentage of that is actually payroll. So if someone's coming in and saying, I have a $10 million movie and we're going to do $200,000 in payroll, people will do that. We'll be like, obviously you have not done your homework. So it's funny how everybody looks at it differently to see if the whole puzzle makes sense.
And the big part that Jeanette mentioned earlier is people always think, oh my God, I got this great, really well-known actor for X amount of money, and they're going to do my low-budget film, except they don't want to give up their perks. Mm-hmm. And then you go to hire a DP and other crew members, and you're looking for someone who will fit within your low-budget parameter, but that's not really what the actor had in mind too, and will whisper to the director and the producers. So you have to be really careful that everybody knows what they're signing on for.
Or if you gave a lead actor some kind of approvals over who the DP is, and suddenly they want a DP that's not in your budget range.
Or hair and makeup.
Yeah.
Or even if they agree to the rate, they don't know how to work within those parameters.
That's
because they're used to money being no object.
Right.
That's a really good point, because I think there's so much more that comes with, even on the director side, when we look at directors who are able to shoot low budget, we look at people who have some kind of an indie background a lot of the time, because if you're a director who's used to always having a 50-day shooting schedule, suddenly doing something for 20 days is a totally different can of worms.
Okay, so if we're looking at story and other rights, who are you paying in there?
That's going to be the writer. If it's based on a book, your IP costs. Anything else that goes into development. So if you might have multiple writers in there, you might have a consultant that you brought in to do some research or to help you with the script at some point.
An attorney who had to negotiate the rights for that.
What about ATL Travel and Living? That seems pretty straightforward, but...
Yep, it's anybody in that above the line that you're taking around to whatever place that you're filming, or whatever you had in development costs because you went and met with the actual person that the story was based on.
How about producer? Is that just a person?
No, it can be anybody who's getting a fee in the project. It can be a company. It can be a line producer who's getting a bump on something as an executive. Anybody who has any title of that in their name.
And there are some smaller categories in there as well, as such as a producer's assistant, a producer's expenses for taking cast out for dinner to lock that deal. There might be some expenses for the producer to fly over to New York and sweet talk the starlet who is up and coming. That needs to be covered in that line as well.
Okay, same with director.
Same with director. A lot of the same applicable line items will be in there in that category as well, such as director's office, director's assistant, some contractual agreements that were decided when the producer closed the director's contract.
Talent.
That's actors, it's stunts, it's casting director, it's rehearsals, it's anything having to do with any of the perks.
Are your background in there as well?
No, they're in a different line.
Okay, so that is all above the line. And this is the spot where we see where the line is, because that's the physical line. All those things are above it. Okay, so then when we get to behind the scenes, production staff. Now, who is considered production staff on the crew?
So the office and the team on set that are actually running the production. It can be like the UPM, the coordinator, the supervisor.
First AD, second AD.
Script supervisor, a production assistant.
Accounting?
Yes.
Yep.
Travel coordinator. Anybody that works in the production office will be captured in that line.
Okay, and then how about camera?
DP, their whole team, and the equipment for it. So in some countries, they split things up differently where they have the manpower in certain lines and the equipment to support that department in a different category. In the United States, the majority of the budgets are put together where if you say camera department, you're talking about labor and equipment.
If you're going to ship your camera, is it in this category or is it someplace else?
It depends on the studio you're working for and the producer. Sometimes people put it there because they like to capture it in one place. Some people put it down in locations or another category because there's a lot of shipping for other departments there, so they try and keep it all in one item instead of separating it out. So it depends on the producer.
Okay. So in the budget, what's included with art department?
The production designer, the art department staff that supports the production designer, so art director, art department coordinator, art department PAs, the equipment that we have to rent, the large copiers and scanners for the set designs, any of their office supplies.
Storyboard artist. So it's interesting when people are putting these together. If you have a framework of how you're looking at a budget, it's a living, breathing object. It's malleable and it moves, and in each production it moves differently. But each person doing a budget thinks differently about doing that budget. So every person is going to approach it differently, even if they've taken certain classes and they're following certain codes on the side of the budget template for themselves. Everybody approaches it in a different way. And to a certain extent, that's a good thing because the thing is you want to understand how they're thinking about it and what their mythology is. And like, I think it was Shirley that said earlier, it's like reading a story. Looking at a budget it's telling a story, and how you understand how that storyteller is unfolding it and where they're putting things in there and how they're tracking it is the way that they compartmentalize in their mind and then how they're showing it on paper. And then that's how they're going to convey it to their teams in each department for them and how that team is going to give it back. So quite often, like, you'll give the art department the first pass of the budget that you've put together for them. And then that production designer and that team will take it and they'll say, well, I really need 4 more swing gang people to do this, and I need 1 more in props, but I don't need the blueprints, and I don't need this much in this, and I don't need that. And so they'll hand you back a budget so that you see their thinking of how they would approach something. And then usually the line producer, UPM, will ingest that into their budget and change their budget a little bit so that you know that you're speaking the same language as them.
Then would you also pad it a little bit as it goes into the big budget?
Usually. It depends on how tight the budget is. I mean, we call it WYSIWYG, is what you see is what you get when you hand it to somebody. So if you hand it to somebody and you say that's your bottom line and you have to hit it, they'll normally pad it for themselves. If you have the ability in your budget, you'll also put a little pad on top of it that they won't know about. And then when that UPM line producer gives it to their head of production, they've also put in a little wiggle room somewhere to do it. So everybody sort of is covering their ass because you never know what's going to come at you any particular day.
I think WYSIWYG is the tweetable that just came out of Look for a graphic on that.
Usually, what I've done in the past is I've removed my personal WYSIWYG and given them the budget and say, oh, this is full disclosure. Here you go. Here's your budget, so that we're always aligned. Once I ingest their budget, but I want to always make sure, even if I get weekly updates, that we're working from the same budget.
The more we work with particular people, the more we understand their strengths and weaknesses. There are certain people, I will never give them my WYSIWYG. I will always give them something more because they need it. They misappropriate and underestimate and get excited about certain things and whatever. So you really want to protect them, and the way that you protect them is by doing something like that. But that comes with experience of working with the same people over and over again.
I would think the same thing with directors too, right? Like, you know that you have that one director who always on the day asks for this one thing that's really hard to find for the art department and sends them off on a wild goose chase.
Having worked at Blumhouse for so long, I coined a verb off of Cooper, and I call it Coopified. So I always know that he is going to throw something at me partway through the production. JJ, wouldn't it be great if we could XYZ, blah, 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 which cost something, which wasn't budgeted or scripted or anything else, but it's come to him after watching the dailies and seeing how it's coming together. He wants to do something else. So I always have to have a little something to throw at it, and that's Coopified.
But that's also like the great thing of working with the same production people all the time, is that you know that there's going to be some kind of padding, or you know together we're going to be able to figure out how you cover that thing when you are looking at dailies and you're like, I don't have that trailer moment yet, and I know for this movie to go over the top, here's what I need.
And then if you're very lucky, you can hoard all them till the end, and then you can have that extra shot.
Yes.
Well, it's always good to go into post with extra money too, because post is usually getting the short end of the stick.
Well, we've also been in situations with, where a director really wanted to do something for a finale or something like that. And sitting down with the line producers, was me and Marcy in this case, we were able to go through the budget and make a deal with the director to say, okay, if you finish every day in 11 and a half hours instead of 12, and you have, your wrap out is this, you can have that, it's a little horse trading, then you can have that big climax that you wanted.
It was like in Project Greenlight when Effie kept kind of holding back the money, because she knew he wanted the big car stunt at the end, and then she was able to deliver the money for the car stunt.
It's a fine line too, because you also don't want to hold back so much that at the end the director will think, oh my God, I didn't get X, Y, or Z, and...
Right, because you have a pile of money. Like, that's not a good thing either.
Yeah, so depends, who you're working with and how much money they want to see back too, or it's just the more experience you get, the better you get at sort of, giving appropriately and still having some savings for post.
Okay, what do you think about inside of set operations?
Set operations deals with your grip department. So you will find the labor there, you will find rentals such as your director wants this techno crane. You have to capture that cost in that section of your budget. And you have to also consider if a certain crane has to have an operator and they need an additional operator on top of that, that'll be captured in that line item. Also,
craft service. You asked earlier what was the things that sometimes get missed. And it's those little treats, because the Army marches on their stomach. So, put in a couple of treats in there, little coffee trucks or taco trucks or whatever it is when they're going along, especially if it's night shoots. Make sure they have, hot soup. And if it's day stuff, make sure that you have, ice cream or something that comes to set to, keep the crew cool and happy.
Like your director's chairs, where do they go?
Props.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Prop department is in charge of director's chairs.
Oh, learned something new every day. Okay, so set lighting, people and equipment.
Yeah, it's your labor and your equipment. It's also where you put specialty items. The director wants a whole separate package of night lights that are separate from your main unit package. That's where you would capture that cost.
And I'm going to back up to set construction because I skipped over that. What's a thing that you forget to put in there?
Trash. Removal.
Enough cranes.
Also, like on a lot of in set construction, you don't realize that some of the sets have to be built off the ground in order to get a low camera angle, or in order to do something on the stage where you're walking a few feet down the steps to make it look like they're coming in and out of something that had stairs. So renting the scaffolding and the flooring for however many weeks is a huge hit that nobody really thinks about when they're building sets or planning stages and stuff.
You mean platforms, right?
Expert tips is what you're getting here on Catch a Break. Okay, we're down to set dressing.
Set dressing is where you capture the cost for your set decorator, your lead man, your swing gang, your cost for decorating that 1940s living room that you have in the script, and you need to find, that antique couch that is specifically written in the script. That's where you would capture those costs.
And remember, if you have a script, for an example, that takes place in one house and you're in a living room and then you're jump cutting to 20 years later in that same living room, or it goes into a haunted space or something, you might have to have that gang come in on the weekend and work 6th and 7th days in order to turn it around to make it look like it's 20 years later or in a haunted space or whatever it is. So that's where you put your 6th and 7th day labor, your extra manpower, because if you're in the same place turning something around that quickly, on paper, it's like, oh yeah, we're just in the same location.
Easy.
But it's not.
What about multiples for the bloodbath that you shot that you have to redress?
Right, right.
And that applies to wardrobe too.
Yeah.
There are a few departments that have what's called appetite accounts. And it's not because they're hungry. It's because those departments are the realm of creative in terms of how much set dressing you have, how many costumes you have, and what the look is, props. They're where the creative decisions are really made and where the budgets can be increased because of special requests.
Like those legendary stories where the director walks out the night before and says, I hate this color, repaint the entire thing.
It's not an appetite, but yeah, that definitely happens. And sometimes you can address it and sometimes you can't.
He might say, I hate the color, but that house should have a second floor.
That's also where having a budget for camera tests can be really helpful. If you have that luxury to be able to do whether it's hair and makeup or costume, to be able to see what something looks like on camera is a very different thing from what it looks like just in person. So that if you can shoot it and review it with your director, you're less likely to get those surprises.
He might come out and say, he or she might come out and say, you know what, I had a different idea for what the wardrobe looked like. There's a famous story in Schindler's List where Spielberg was trying to make it for a price. And the costume designer who he had worked with for a very long time didn't want to tell him that a particular boot that he had wanted was too expensive. So he came up, so all these people that were supposed to be soldiers came up into the scene and he was like, I hate these boots. And she had to go back and do it, but it was, instead of having the conversation, she was nervous about both the budget and the creative, and that's what often happens with these appetite accounts. Rather than just asking, I think it's hard to ask Spielberg, but asking your director specifically, like making sure you have the look set beforehand.
That's where you do show and tell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A couple weeks, as early as you can, as far in advance as possible, you do show and tells with props, with set dressing, with costumes, and, try things on and move around and things and rebuild stuff. And that's why the budget doesn't get locked until right before you start shooting. That's why it's a movable feast.
What about loss and damage in some of these categories? Does that go is that part of the wardrobe or?
Yep. Each category has their own L&D, and you hope and pray that you don't use all of that, because you try to turn that into something that you can put on screen rather than stuff that you're replacing.
But that's where you damage the hardwood floors in the location you're using.
Yep.
Yeah.
We've done that.
Just replace.
I have to say the thing that we've probably done the most out of all of my years is replace grass is the thing that I think we've done the most. I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars reseeding people's lawns.
I'd like to invite you to shoot in my house anytime. Drag whatever you want across the floor.
Because what you don't realize is, if you're shooting in somebody's real house, you've got all these people standing out in front with
ruining their lawn.
Tents and standby equipment and everything, ruining their lawn. Yeah.
Or you're making rain and flooding, the lawn, and then it has to be replaced for those reasons. We've done that too.
Yes, we have.
What about picture vehicles and animals? What do you need to think about?
The American Humane Society now charges the production to come to the set. They never used to. However, it's really important to get their seal to make sure that...
It's actually not mandated for us anymore. Some places are still required, but for us, it's not mandated.
Who's us?
Through
Universal.
Oh, interesting.
So know who you're working for and what their specific
stipulations are.
Yeah.
And this is where one of the places that Shirley had mentioned where you have to consider multiples. So if you have a very specific picture card and in the script it's destroyed, but your shooting schedule doesn't allow you to shoot in order, you've got to have multiples of that car.
And you might need to take it apart and shoot pieces of it with people in it rather than the whole car.
Are there restrictions on like the duration you can shoot with animals in the way there are for kids? Are there other regulations like that?
Yes, and the animal wranglers are teamsters, which is why they're coupled together with picture vehicles, because that's teamsters as well. And you have to give them certain travel allowances, certain ways of, you have to pay for feeding and housing and training, and you're not just training one animal, you're training multiple animals. I think we had, I don't know, I want to say 7 Benjis when we did Benji. So there are multiple dogs or cats or whatever it is that you're working with. And certain animals are high risk and are hard to train or impossible to do. So, you have to know the limitations of what it is that you're asking a certain animal to do.
And stuff that comes with those animals. I remember shooting with rattlesnakes and we had to have an ambulance standing by with the right anti-venom and stuff like that. So all those added costs.
Yep. I'm having an interesting discussion with a friend of mine who I want to have come on the show, who is an armorer. And back in the day, the armorers were part of the first negotiations in the union with camera and wardrobe and all of that stuff. Sound came later because we didn't get talkies till later, right? So the sound department actually makes more than the armorer does. And the armorer is somebody who has lives at risk, safety at hand, yet they get paid $20, $30 less than a sound person. And it was only because the sound people came later and had leverage over the fact that they were new and it was something that everybody wanted. And back in the day, it was tape and it wasn't digital. But changing that today to make it more balanced and fair would be a Herculean fight, because clearly sound's not going to let go of where they're at.
Sure.
But you've got people who are handling mass weapons on set and teaching people how to handle them properly. And anything could go wrong with that, who are getting paid a lot less than they should be.
It sounds to me like the armorers are going to go after the sound people on set.
But those kind of historical stories to let you know how Hollywood came to be and what's tracking with it are very interesting.
It's like workers' comp rate for editors in other parts of the country are really high because it was based on when they were slicing film with blades.
Right.
Whereas now it's, just computer.
Someone just told me this story about why craft service is in the grip department instead of in locations. And they said it came from the fact that when the crew was not fed on set, like on a studio lot, they would say, go take an hour lunch, and they would walk away.
But they were also there to service the crafts. So craft service was there to sweep, to clean, to put the layout board down, and to service whatever the crafts needed. That's the actual term of where it came from.
And that makes total sense if it's in the grip department, as opposed to locations. But I actually didn't know that, so I thought it was interesting.
Are they still sweeping and emptying the trash?
Around their little corner, but not
around their table.
Locations is doing that.
Yeah.
Or unit manager.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about, makeup in here is makeup in here. I don't think we need to belabor all the people plus equipment. Although maybe we talk about kit rentals with makeup in hair.
Makeup and hair is an interesting one because they can be requested by your lead actors And if that's the case, they can set their own price and it can be astronomical. And they can make a lot of money because they end up becoming first in and last out as well. So if you have somebody who's going to be in the chair for a long time, they can make a ridiculous amount of overtime in their salary. And that can really hurt your budget if it wasn't something that you were preparing for or planning. And also, this is where the special effects makeup goes as well. So if you have prosthetics being done, this is the area that you would put that in.
And you're going to rent their kit, and you're going to fill their kit?
You're going to rent their kit, definitely. They have specialty items that they use for their job that they have purchased themselves and they use for every production. It doesn't really make sense for a one-off production to go and buy all the makeup kits because, one, as a line producer, I don't know anything about it. And two, it's just more cost efficient to give them a small stipend to use those items that we need on every show. So they carry certain pieces of tools, per se, that they need for their job from job to job, and they use them for, every actor who comes through their trailer and sits on their chair.
I'd have to say this is one of the areas where product placement can help.
Yes.
Where it comes through and you can actually use it and it helps is when you can get a makeup company to get behind whatever the story is or whoever the actors are to provide you with some of the basics. It helps the bottom line, especially on an indie film.
Also, hair and makeup have their own leads and own vendors that they definitely like to use that will give them product.
Yep.
So you just have to be smart about how you're handling with them. I think oftentimes they get paid quite a bit of money, especially if they're a cast request. And if they don't feel like they're getting their due, then I think that's when you'll start to see that they're asking for more for their kit rental. It's just treating them appropriately. And also that's part of the business sometimes where you just pay a premium for those kit rentals.
I look at hair and makeup as the bartenders of the set. They're sitting in their trailer and they're listening to the cast and they're talking them through, and they can help navigate the way that your cast feel before they come out onto set. So they can hear all of the gripes and whatever, and you can help try to address them, and they can hear about their lives and get it all out or run lines with them.
So then is the kit rental their tips?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Let's skip down to post. That seems to be a whole specialty just on its own. Who do you reach out to for help budgeting post?
Well, depending if you're an indie or if you're working for some type of studio, they have a whole department that deals with post, and they can give you great insight of things that you need to consider that very often get forgotten, such as a MPAA seal, to allocate monies for preview screenings, to allocate enough money for important items such as DI or sound mixing. If you're working on an indie, hopefully you can build a relationship with a post house or a post facility and say, I'm building a budget. I want to get, some advice from you. How much should I allocate for Avid rental? How much should I allocate for an Avid suite? How much should I allocate for Pro Tools? Those type of things that somebody who's in production may not think about. And as Jeanette mentioned earlier, post-production often gets the short end of the stick because everybody's worried about getting enough material to give them, but not thinking about what post needs to do to actually deliver.
And a lot of people don't budget post all the way through, especially a true indie. They won't put the deliverables in post. And you need to know if you have a particular budget and you've raised a certain amount of money and you haven't included for deliverables, that you're going to get charged that even if they buy the film. It'll be charged to that. So you have to have an idea of what those deliverables cost so that you can make a smart decision when it comes to the time of selling the film.
What would you include in the deliverables?
Well, each studio is different, and it depends if you're going theatrically or if you're going to a streaming service now.
So that's like the format that the final film has to be in?
Yes, and all of the requirements to it. And some places are requiring that, this is something great to know, some places are requiring, especially the streaming services, that you shoot in 4K. The majority of the projects that we've done over the years have been shot in 2K, which is the resolution that the camera does. And if you're required to deliver 4K, you need to know that before you start filming and before you start budgeting, because it requires more time to process the data. So your person or your company that's doing the data processing from your dailies is going to be more expensive if you're in 4K.
It's also important, to Jeanette's point, that when you're budgeting, you should be realistic. It shouldn't be about magical thinking, because even if you want to get something made so desperately, you really need to have a realistic budget to start with, so that you know what you need to raise, or you know what you could start the shoot and know that you will then need to raise money for post if you've only raised enough for production. But it's really important to have a budget that has integrity, so that you could really do a professional job in terms of producing the film.
And I'll tell you one of the things that's missing from this that a true indie would have: SAG deposit, DGA deposit, IA deposit.
We're talking about cash flow.
Yeah. So all of those things usually go into a budget if you're a true indie and you don't have someone that's sponsoring you, putting those deposits down for you.
Because you have no credit, you're going to need to put money up front.
Yep.
That's more than your budget.
Yep.
That is an excellent point. Okay, the last couple of things. We have insurance. Of course, you have to buy insurance. And then what's lumped into the general expenses?
That's like legal, like Rick said, some of the licensing that you need to buy, like a Dolby license or something like that.
As well as post-production accounting, some
LLC.
But your company costs.
Company
Tax
costs,
returns.
taxes, yeah.
It's general expenses, essentially.
That
What
go
you
with
would
having
need-
a company.
Yeah, exactly. Or LLC, set up a company. Or you just,
Okay, so you have, under your grand total of cost, you have a negative number for Louisiana incentive. So is that where you're tracking your credit?
That is where you are tracking your credit. When you're building your budget, you can go into your groups and set up qualified spend, qualified labor, non-qualified spend, and you can, when you're building, you put in a rate for your key grip, who happens to be a local hire, whose payroll will qualify towards your incentive, your credit. You would check that off in your budget, and it would add that whatever percentage, 25%, wherever, depending on where you are, that you can claim as part of your incentive. And that'll help you see that even though your grand total is $6 million, after you get your credit, after you get your incentive, you are going to be hitting a total of 5.3, and that is your net total.
Now, something to note on some of the incentives: if it's a cash incentive, that's one thing. You're going to get back what they say in cash. But if it's a credit incentive, some states are flooded and they don't give you the credit at 100%. So you have to discount it because someone's got to sell it. Someone's going to buy it for a discount. There's a transactional cost that goes through there. So what you thought you were going to get in the credit of, let's say you had a 25% credit in a state and you were anticipating getting $1 million back on it, you might get 87 cents on the dollar for it by the time it goes through all the transactional things. So you need to put that discount in your credit line when you're putting that in there, just to be safe. It's always better to undershoot a little bit and be safe and come in okay than to come in over what you're anticipating getting.
So that adds into your general expenses, your expenses around your incentive, because you're going to need an audit, you're going to need someone to do the applications, you're going to need to do all those pieces.
Yes.
never forget, you need an excellent production accountant.
All right, I think that brings us to our martini shot. So Rick, what is your last bit of advice?
Playing on what we just brought up, I want to give props to the accounting department. A line producer needs a great accountant and a great payroll accountant. They will have your back and make sure that you have applied the proper fringes, that you have the right overtime. The accountant will be your second or third set of eyes to look at your budget, your fringes, your overtime, all those things that you are, trying to get in there before you hand it over to your head of physical production, who's going to say, this number is not good, and you've got to go back and you've got to figure out how to bring it down, $1 million.
Shirley.
I would say a great production accountant first and foremost, and also a great AD who could schedule it so that you actually know that the information you're putting in is accurate to the script. But certainly the accountant, and if he has a great team, that's where you really should put a lot of your money into getting the best team possible.
Jeanette, what's your martini shot?
Don't be afraid to really get into the weeds on things and ask a lot of questions. In the early years, we would ask people to teach us what it was that they needed in order to get their job done, and what things were called and what things cost, and understand the details, because it'll make you make better decisions if you understand these things. Always, always ask and educate yourself.
Go deep.
Go deep.
Thank you, everybody. We hope that this helped you to catch a break.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Catch a Break with the Catch a Break team. Please check out the website at catchabreakpodcast.com and follow us on all the social media. Catch a Break is produced in partnership with Cashlight Films, Rose Colored Pictures, and the Other 50%, and it is also sponsored by Crewvy, an online solution for producers to find and promote local crew and production support worldwide. Find them at crewvie.com. And thank you to Andrew Jocelyn, who created our theme music, Mantra for a Struggling Artist. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode where we learn more about utilizing social media.